nice to see that he's rolled out Plan B as well to try and cover up the Christmas party scenario. I think he's toast. What about you? What do you think?
I don't know whether he's toast, but I'm reasonably confident. In fact, I'm very confident that Plan B is a dead cat.
Yes.
Now, I don't know how well known this is in the UK, but it is very common in Australian politics and was actually Linton Crosby and Mark Textor's
Well, I think it was
development.
Linton Crosby's been in Downing Street, and I think it was Linton Crosby that imported the dead cat scenario into British politics.
Yeah. And the basic logic of it is there's this huge controversy happening that is extraordinarily embarrassing and destructive, not just to the government, because I think these Downing Street parties are bigger than that. They are reflective of problems across the entire blob. You know, I am reading things now that there were prominent journalists at some of them, and this kind of thing. So it's the entire blob, all the great and the good, making rules for us and then not following them themselves. So this is hugely embarrassing for the entire blob in this country.
Well, what's been interesting has been barrister after barrister writing pieces about how it's not actually against the law, but don't actually get it. It's not about whether it's against the law. It's about how it looks, and it doesn't look good when other people couldn't do anything.
Yeah, lawyers need to understand this. I mean, I'm a lawyer as well, and I get that some of them may even be Tories, but I'm a Tory. I'm a card-carrying member of the party. Justice doesn't just have to be done. It has to be seen to be done.
Yes.
And so if you can't follow your own rules, you're in real strife. But to get back to the dead cat point, the whole point of it is you get a dead cat. This is the Australian joke, and you throw it on the table. It's a dead cat. And so instead of talking about the huge embarrassing scandal that's happening, everybody's going, look, there's a dead cat on the table. I can't do the accent properly anymore, but that's what it is. I thought this last night, and I was talking to my partner about it, and I said, I think this is a dead cat. And she's going, sleep on it, Helen. It might actually be real. And friends of mine who are careful and scrupulous, like Stephen Davies, the professor from Manchester University, put a long Facebook update out trying to set out all the arguments about Omicron and so on and so forth. And I take his point. He's trying to do the sober, reasonable, analytical thing. But I read what he said, and then I went to bed and I slept on it. And I've woken up in the morning with a clear head and a couple of cups of coffee and said, no, this is a dead cat. Yeah. That's all it is.
I think
it's a dead cat.
Because there's absolutely no reason to introduce it. The introductory measures are going to not do anything whatsoever. And they're probably going to call it off in a couple of weeks' time as well, because they even said that they hope to lift all these restrictions by January. So they're actually now putting in restrictions for something that hasn't happened yet.
There's also a suspicion in my head that it's quite likely these restrictions will not only be restricted soon, but will be lifted very shortly after the Shropshire by-election.
Yes.
Because they know that, I mean, whilst the support for lockdown and for anti-COVID measures is higher amongst Labour voters, it's also quite high amongst Tory voters as well. This is the thing. One of the effects of pandemics, and Dan Hannan has written about this, is that they make us like the smack of firm government. A lot of people respond positively to that sort of thing. You just have to acknowledge that that's a real thing that exists. And it's also a way of peeling a few voters off of Labour in quite a posh seat. So it would not surprise me. I mean, they won't be so obvious as to do it on the Friday afterwards. But the following week, I would not be at all surprised.
Yeah, I mean, my sense has just always been that they want to kind of cover over Christmas as well, because originally the next statement was going to be made on the 18th of December, then it was going to be the 20th of December, literally 4 days before Christmas kicked in. And I think they were always going to try and ensure that people didn't get too carried away over Christmas, because for some reason, once more, the NHS can't handle anybody being sick.
Well, this is the other thing, and this is where I will make one of Steve Davies's points, which I think is correct. The old traditional argument for very strong vaccine compulsion, if not mandates, not actual proper compulsory vaccination, which we don't do in this country and haven't done since the mid-19th century, it was to protect other people from getting sick. And the argument against compulsory vaccination with COVID is that the thing is the vaccines, that they reduce the tendency to infect others, but they certainly don't stop it from happening. Omicron and Delta have gone wild. even with a heavily vaccinated population. But what this is actually designed to do, and Professor Davies makes this point, is it's designed to protect the healthcare system, not other people, the healthcare system. So you finished up with a situation where this country is effectively a health service with a government attached.
Yes.
Everything has become in the service of the NHS.
And unfortunately, the health services is just as bad as the government.
Well, it's become the National COVID Service, which is something that people across the political spectrum have been talking about for a very long time. And I do think, and I take the point, and it was being tweeted by a lot of Birmingham City supporters because of the little boy in the Birmingham City shirt who was killed, that the safeguarding measures that were introduced after Victoria Climbier and Baby P were not able to be pursued properly in that case, precisely because of lockdown. That should, in my view, should be much more controversial than it has been, rather than people just banging on about let's reintroduce the death penalty because these two are obvious mongrels.
Well, I mean, there are two stories, I think, that did regard, did deserve different types of attention. And the one that's not getting much today is Boris's kind of refusal to rule out mandatory vaccinations yesterday, which kind of slipped under the wire because everyone was talking about the parties and the rollout of Plan B. Not that many people, Julie Hartley-Brewer mentioned it, of course, this morning, but not many people are talking about that.
And the difficulty is trying to work out to what extent that comment was just part of the wider dead cat. You know, let's have a Maine Coon instead of Chili. Chili is a little cat. You know, Maine Coon is a big cat. So it's quite difficult to parse how much of this is backside covering dead cat and how much of it is serious policy. And I don't know. I don't like forecasting. It doesn't work. We've all seen all the forecasters make terrible fools of themselves. So I don't want to go any further than saying that I think this is a dead cat and I think it's designed to help them win a by-election.
But the problem for everybody else there, Helen, is that in fact, once you think that the party and the leader of that party and the leader of the country is actually introducing policy restricting people's behaviour in order to cover something up, that is not something that people are willing to put up with. I mean, everything that I'm seeing, apart from a very, very tiny minority of messages today, is he's got to go. He has to go. He's lost the trust of the people. You know, we've been willing to put up with all sorts of shenanigans, all sorts of peccadillos, all sorts of, you know, things that didn't really seem to matter. But now it's got way out of hand, and he's become a liability.
He does see, and some of the the bad behaviour seems to be, and very silly policy seems to be born. He's picking it up, and you don't like to criticise new mums, but he seems to be picking it up from his wife. You know,
everybody knows that she's been the biggest liability of all time, because all the people that have caused him problems inside of Downing Street, basically, have been people that she's brought in. And she has not allowed anybody into the inner circle that she hasn't previously approved. And whatever you might have thought about Dominic Cummings, you know, he was a reasonably constant source of logic inside the building. And now he's been forced out as well. So he was forced out as well, attacking from the outside. But anyway, you know, I dare say we could talk about that all day. Let's talk about something else. Let's talk about instead the nonsense that's going on up at Durham University. I don't know how well you know Durham University, but it is supposedly one of the great seats of learning. It's meant to be one of the older and more established, sort of very close to Oxbridge type places, but they seem to have lost the plot.
Well, it's the traditional thing that was said about Durham, because I went to Oxford, was that it was where all the Oxford and Cambridge rejects went, unless they were Scots. And Scots got the tartan pass and went to Edinburgh or Glasgow. It has a collegiate system like Oxford and Cambridge. Durham does as well. It's Tim Luckhurst, the professor who originally told the students to grow up and get over themselves, which would be my instinct as well, I have to say, has made the fatal mistake of apologising. You never, ever apologise to wokies.
No.
They don't accept it in good grace. And this is an awful thing, because if you have actually done something wrong and you wish to make a sincere apology, you actually can't.
No.
They see an apology as the person rolling over on their back and exposing their belly.
Yeah, so that they can then shoot them.
Well, shoot them or eviscerate them. That's the thing. So he's made the crucial error of apologising, particularly in light of the fact, and the students who staged the walkout have been quite frank about this, they didn't like Rod Liddle And they deliberately went to that supper with a view to walking out in the middle of it.
Yeah.
Now, my understanding, and this is where you're talking about people who are who wish to be offended. It's like someone walking down the street and picking up a big piece of dog poo and sticking it under your nose and going, look, it smells.
Yeah.
That's exactly what it is. You're dealing with people who are looking to be offended.
Yeah.
Now, there are certain comedians I don't find funny, even though I like live comedy and go to live comedy a lot. You know, well, certainly before the pandemic, I used to go a lot.
Yeah.
And there are people I don't find funny, so I just don't go to their shows.
Right.
And that is the normal and healthy response to a comedian or a columnist or a speaker that you don't like.
Yeah, I mean, Rod Liddell
Yeah.
does not exactly hide his light under a bushel, does he? I mean, you kind of know
No, he doesn't.
what he talks about and what he stands for.
He's completely obvious about what he stands for. He's completely obvious about what he believes. He trades on being funny, and he is funny. That does help. So there's a degree of crossover there between columnist and stand-up comedian.
Yeah.
And the thing is, if you don't like that sort of speaker, if you don't like that sort of comedy, then you don't go to see his talk. You just don't. And so looking to be offended, particularly as all of this is always couched in the language of harm. You know, if Rod Liddell cracks a joke, or Dave Chappelle cracks a joke, or Andrew Doyle, or whoever it is this week cracks a joke, and it harms me, I just don't accept these arguments as reasonable, for the simple reason, if you think you're going to be harmed by somebody's gag, why are you deliberately putting yourself in the audience?
Right.
It's not as though you turn up and find someone, go to a show, often there's 3 or 4 comedians, and one of them turns out to be really irritating and you don't like. I mean, I've had that experience at the Edinburgh Fringe because I used to live there.
Yeah.
That's a different phenomenon. These are people who deliberately put themselves in the way of Rod Liddell's gags.
Yes, exactly.
I struggle to take that seriously.
And they claimed that they were distressed by it, and also made to feel emotional as a result.